The bruises on her arm told a story she'd never speak aloud. When Charlotte Hale stepped off that stagecoach in Stone Creek, she was running from a monster who wore the mask of family. She had three options: marry a stranger, return to hell, or die trying to survive alone on the frontier. What she didn't know was that the quiet rancher waiting for her would ask the one question that would change everything. Are you here because you want to be? This is her story. One woman's journey from possession to power, from fear to freedom, from surviving to truly living. Before we begin, if you're enjoying this story, please hit that like button and drop a comment telling me what city you're watching from. I love seeing how far these stories travel across the world. The stagecoach lurched to a stop, sending up clouds of red dust that caught the afternoon sun and turned the air gold. Charlotte Hale pressed her gloved hand against the window frame, watching the frontier town of Stone Creek materialize through the haze like a mirage she wasn't entirely sure she wanted to reach. 12 buildings. Maybe 15 if she counted the skeletal frame of what looked like a church under construction. Wood and hope, that's all any of these towns were. Wood and hope and desperate people trying to carve civilization out of wilderness. She was one of them now. "Stone Creek," the driver called, his voice rough from dust and distance. "End of the line for some, new beginning for others." Charlotte's fingers found the edge of her sleeve, tugging it down over the bruises that had faded from purple to yellow-green. 3 weeks on the road, and they were finally starting to disappear. The ones on her soul would take longer. The other passengers stirred. A merchant heading to Sacramento, a young couple seeking land grants, an older woman who'd watched Charlotte with knowing eyes the entire journey but never asked questions. Charlotte was grateful for that. She'd had enough questions in her life, none of them kind. "You ready for this, dear?" the older woman asked now, her voice low enough that only Charlotte could hear. "I don't have a choice." The woman's weathered hand covered Charlotte's. "We always have a choice. Sometimes we just don't like any of the options." Before Charlotte could respond, the door swung open. The driver's face appeared, wind-burned and creased with the kind of wrinkles that came from squinting at horizons for 30 years. "Miss Hale, your intended's waiting." Her intended, such a formal word for a transaction that had been arranged through letters and desperation. She'd answered an advertisement in a Boston newspaper, words that had seemed like a lifeline when she'd read them in the dim light of her uncle's library, waiting for him to come home drunk and angry. Rancher in Stone Creek, Colorado, seeking a wife. Must be of good character and willing to work. No family ties preferred. Respond to C. Whitmore, general delivery. No family ties preferred. Those 4 words had spoken to her more than any poetry ever had. Charlotte gathered her carpet bag, everything she owned in the world fit inside it, and stepped toward the door. Her legs trembled from 3 weeks of sitting, from fear, from the weight of what she was about to do. The driver offered his hand. She took it, grateful for the steadiness, even as her heart hammered against her ribs like a caged bird. Stone Creek's main street stretched before her, wider than she'd expected. Hitching posts lined both sides, horses switching their tails against flies. A few people had gathered, curious about the stagecoach arrival perhaps, or specifically about her. Word traveled fast in small towns. Everyone would know a mail-order bride was arriving today. "There!" The driver pointed to a tall man standing slightly apart from the small crowd. "That'll be Whitmore." Charlotte's breath caught. She'd imagined him 100 different ways during the journey. Old and weathered, young and cruel, everything in between. The reality of Caleb Whitmore defied her imagination entirely. He stood perhaps 6 feet tall, lean in the way of men who worked hard and ate simple. His dark hair needed cutting, curling slightly at his collar. He wore work clothes, canvas pants, a cotton shirt rolled to his elbows, a leather vest that had seen better years, scuffed boots, a hat in his hands that he turned slowly, nervously. But it was his face that stopped her, not handsome in the classical sense, but carved with a quiet strength that reminded Charlotte of the mountains she'd crossed to get here. Strong jaw, straight nose, eyes that were studying her with the same careful intensity she was studying him. He wasn't smiling, neither was she. They were two strangers about to bind their lives together based on letters and loneliness. Charlotte stepped down from the coach. Her boot heel caught on the step, and she stumbled forward. Caleb moved instinctively, reaching out to steady her. His hand brushed her arm, just the sleeve, nothing invasive, but the fabric shifted under his touch, and he saw them. Charlotte watched his eyes drop to the yellowing bruises that circled her upper arm like a string of dark pearls. Fingerprints. Unmistakable. She saw his jaw tighten, saw something flash through his eyes, anger, but not at her. Never at her. She flinched anyway. Old habits died hard. Caleb dropped his hand immediately, stepping back to give her space. When he spoke, his voice was low, pitched for her ears only. "I won't hurt you." 4 words, simple, direct, probably inadequate for what he'd just seen. But Charlotte heard what he didn't say. "I'm not him. Whoever did this, I'm not him." "Miss Charlotte Hale?" he asked, louder now for the benefit of the watching crowd. "Yes." Her voice came out steadier than she'd expected. "Mr. Whitmore?" "Caleb." He offered a slight smile that didn't quite reach his eyes. "Just Caleb. Welcome to Stone Creek." The crowd pressed closer, mostly men, she noted, with a few women scattered among them. A tall man with a sheriff's badge stepped forward, grinning. "Well, Caleb, she's prettier than you deserve. Hope you know how to talk to a lady, you old hermit." Scattered laughter rippled through the onlookers. Charlotte felt heat rise to her cheeks, but Caleb's expression didn't change. He simply nodded to the sheriff. "Thank you for the observation, Sheriff Morrison. I'll take it under advisement." More laughter, but gentler this time. Charlotte realized with a start that they were laughing with him, not at him. These people liked Caleb Whitmore. A woman pushed through the crowd, petite, dark-haired, wearing a practical brown dress and an expression of determination. "For heaven's sake, let the poor woman breathe. She's been traveling for weeks, and you're all standing here gawking like she's a circus attraction." The woman turned to Charlotte with a warm smile. "I'm Margaret Chen. I run the general store with my husband, Thomas. You need anything, you come see me, understood?" Charlotte found herself smiling back despite everything. "Thank you, Mrs. Chen." "Margaret, we don't stand on formality much out here." She shot a pointed look at the crowd. "Though apparently we don't stand on good manners either. Shoo, all of you. Let Caleb take his bride home." The crowd dispersed reluctantly, casting curious glances over their shoulders. Charlotte heard whispers, some kind, some speculative, none malicious that she could detect. When they were relatively alone, Caleb turned to her. "I have a wagon just over there. It's about a 40-minute ride to the ranch. If you'd rather rest in town first, board at the hotel for the night, I can—" "No." Charlotte said it too quickly, too sharply. She modulated her tone. "I mean, I'd prefer to see the ranch, if that's all right." Something in his expression softened. "Of course. Let me get your trunk." "I don't have a trunk, just this." She lifted her carpet bag. Caleb studied her for a long moment, and Charlotte wondered what he saw. A woman traveling across the country with one small bag. A woman with bruises on her arms and shadows in her eyes. A woman who'd answered an advertisement because she had nowhere else to go. "All right," he said finally. "The wagon's this way." He didn't offer his arm, didn't try to take her bag, just walked beside her, matching his longer stride to hers, keeping a respectful distance. The wagon was simple but sturdy, pulled by 2 bay horses that looked well cared for. Caleb helped her up to the bench seat with careful hands that didn't linger, then climbed up beside her. "Ready?" he asked. Charlotte nodded, not trusting her voice. They rolled out of Stone Creek as the afternoon sun began its descent toward the mountains. The town fell away behind them, replaced by rolling prairie that stretched endlessly in all directions. Grass the color of honey rippled in the wind. In the distance, mountains rose like sentinels, their peaks still crowned with snow despite the late spring warmth. It was beautiful, overwhelming. Nothing like Boston. "It's about 5 miles to the ranch," Caleb said after they'd been riding in silence for several minutes. "The house isn't fancy, but it's solid. Built it myself 4 years ago when I filed the claim. There's a barn, a chicken coop, a well with good water. The land's good for cattle. I've got about 50 head right now, hoping to double that next year." He was giving her facts, Charlotte realized. Safe, practical information that didn't require her to reveal anything about herself. "That sounds good," she managed. "I should tell you about the neighbors. Closest spread is the Morrison place. You met Sheriff Tom Morrison in town. His wife Sarah lives about 3 miles east. Good people. They've got 2 boys. To the west, maybe 6 miles, is the Bridger Ranch. Samuel and Mary Bridger, older couple. Their sons work the land with them. North of us is open range mostly, but there's a family of homesteaders settled in about 8 miles back. The Johnsons. They're struggling some, but they're determined. Charlotte listened, building a mental map. Neighbors far enough away for privacy, close enough for help if needed. Do you go to town often? She asked. Once a week usually, sometimes twice if there's business. Margaret, Mrs. Chen, she runs a tab for me at the store. I settle up at the end of each month. He paused. You'll have your own account there too, whatever you need. I don't have any money to. You won't need it. You're my wife. He said it matter-of-factly, then seemed to hear how it sounded. What I mean is, what's mine is yours, the ranch, the accounts, all of it. That's how marriage works. Charlotte's fingers tightened on her carpetbag. That's how marriage works. She'd heard those words before, in her uncle's house, when he'd taken control of the inheritance her father had left her. What's mine is yours, and what's yours is mine. Except in practice, it had all flowed one direction. Caleb must have sensed her tension. He was quiet for a moment, then spoke carefully. Charlotte. May I call you Charlotte? Yes. Charlotte, I want to be straight with you about something. I know we've exchanged letters, but writing's different from talking face to face. And there are things we need to discuss before. He trailed off, then tried again. The wedding is set for 3 days from now. Reverend Taylor is coming out from Denver City. He makes a circuit through this area once a month, and I arranged for him to stop here. 3 days. Charlotte felt something loosen in her chest. Not relief exactly, but an easing of immediate panic. I thought it would be today, she said quietly. I thought you might appreciate some time. To settle in. To be sure this is what you want. Charlotte turned to stare at him. What I want? Yes. He kept his eyes on the road ahead, but she could see tension in his shoulders. I know you came a long way. I know you wouldn't have done that without good reason. But I want you to be here because you choose to be, not because you feel trapped. I answered your advertisement. You did, and I'm grateful for that. But answering an ad and living the reality are different things. I'm offering you 3 days to decide if you can live with me, with this life. If you can't, he paused and she heard the difficulty in his voice. If you can't, I'll give you money for passage back to Boston or wherever you want to go. Charlotte's throat tightened. You'd do that? After I came all this way? I want a wife, yes, but I want a willing one. A partner, not a prisoner. He finally looked at her, and the intensity in his eyes made her breath catch. So yes, I'd do that. They rode in silence for a while. Charlotte watched the landscape roll past, processing what he'd said. A choice. He was giving her a choice. The bruises, she said finally, surprising herself. On my arm. Caleb's hands tightened on the reins. You don't have to. My uncle, Victor Hale. He was my guardian after my parents died when I was 16. She stopped, then forced herself to continue. He wasn't kind. Did he? Caleb's voice was rough. Did he do more than that? Charlotte understood what he was asking. No, not that, but he was controlling. Violent when he drank, which was often. When I turned 21, I inherited money from my father's estate. Uncle Victor managed it, said he was protecting me, but he was really protecting his access to it. You ran, Caleb said. It wasn't a question. I ran. Charlotte took a shaky breath. I took what little I could carry and left in the middle of the night. He'll be looking for me. He won't like losing control of the money. How much? Excuse me? The inheritance. How much? Charlotte named the figure. It wasn't a fortune, but it was enough to live on comfortably. Enough to make her worth controlling. Caleb was quiet for a long moment. Then he said, When you marry me, that money becomes legally mine under current law. You know that. Yes. Her voice was barely a whisper. I want you to understand something, Charlotte. If you decide to marry me, I'll use that money however you want me to use it. It's yours, legally or not. I don't need it. The ranch makes enough to support us. If you want it invested, we'll invest it. If you want to donate every penny to orphans, we'll do that. If you want to save it for our children someday, he paused. The point is, it'll still be yours. I'll put that in writing if you want. Charlotte felt tears prick her eyes. She blinked them back furiously. Why? Why what? Why would you do that? Why would you give me a choice? Why would you... She gestured helplessly. Why would you be decent? Caleb pulled the wagon to a stop. They were alone on the prairie, nothing but grass and sky surrounding them. He turned to face her fully. My father wasn't a good man, he said quietly. He drank. He had a temper. My mother took the brunt of it for years before she finally left, took me and my sister with her. We lived with her parents in Ohio until I was old enough to work. I watched what that kind of life did to her, the fear, the flinching, the way she never felt safe even after we got away. He looked out at the horizon. I swore I'd never be that kind of man. I'd never make a woman feel trapped or afraid in her own home. So when I decided I wanted a wife, I wanted someone who chose this life, chose me, with full knowledge of what she was getting. And what is she getting? Charlotte asked. Caleb met her eyes. An honest man, a hard worker, someone who will provide for you and protect you, someone who will respect your choices and your boundaries. I can't promise perfection. I'm sure I'll make mistakes. But I can promise I'll never raise my hand to you in anger. I'll never force you to do anything you don't want to do. And I'll give you as much time as you need to feel safe. Charlotte studied his face, looking for the lie, the manipulation, the hidden cruelty. She'd gotten good at spotting it in her uncle's house. She didn't see it in Caleb Whitmore. What she saw was a tired man who'd chosen loneliness over risking becoming his father, a man who'd built something solid and honest out here in the wilderness, a man offering her something no one had offered in years, a choice. 3 days, she said. 3 days, he confirmed. And after that, whatever you decide, I'll respect it. He clicked to the horses, and they moved forward again. The ranch appeared on the horizon as the sun touched the mountains. Charlotte saw it gradually materialize. A house, a barn, outbuildings scattered across a small valley where a creek cut through the land. Trees clustered near the water, their leaves bright green with spring growth. It looked like a postcard, like something too good to be real. Caleb guided the wagon down a gentle slope. As they got closer, Charlotte could see details. The house was small but well built, wood siding weathered to silver gray. A porch wrapped around the front, with a rocking chair positioned to face the sunset. The barn was larger than the house, red paint fading but still solid. Cattle grazed in a pasture beyond, black and white shapes against the green grass. Home, Caleb said simply. He pulled the wagon up to the house and climbed down, then came around to help Charlotte. This time when he offered his hand, she took it. His palm was calloused, warm, steady. Her feet touched solid ground. I'll show you inside, Caleb said. Then I need to tend the stock. You can settle in, rest. There's food in the kitchen, nothing fancy, but enough. Make yourself at home. Make yourself at home. Such a simple phrase, such an impossible concept. The house was dim inside, cool after the warmth of the day. Caleb led her through a small front room with a fireplace, a table, 2 chairs, a rocking chair near the window. Clean, but sparse. A man's space. Kitchen's through here. He showed her a compact room with a cast-iron stove, a pump sink, open shelves holding dishes and supplies. A window looked out toward the barn. Bedroom's back here. He led her down a short hallway. 2 doors. He opened the first. This is yours. Charlotte stepped into the room. A bed with a simple frame, a dresser, a washstand, a window with curtains someone had made with care. Not fancy, but clean and private. The other room is mine, Caleb said from the doorway. There's a lock on your door. Keys in the dresser drawer. Use it whenever you want. Charlotte turned to stare at him. A lock? For your privacy, your safety. He shifted his weight, uncomfortable. I know we'll be married, but I meant what I said about choices. That includes that. He gestured vaguely toward the bed, color rising in his cheeks. I won't pressure you. We can take things slow as you need. Charlotte felt something crack inside her chest, not breaking, shifting, making room for something she'd thought was dead. Hope. Thank you, she whispered. Caleb nodded. I'll leave you to rest. If you need anything, I'll be in the barn for the next hour or so. After that, I'll be in the house. I usually make dinner around 6. You're welcome to join me, or I can bring something to your room if you'd prefer. I'll think about it. That's fine. He started to leave, then paused. Charlotte, I'm glad you're here. Whatever you decide after 3 days, I'm glad you're here now. Then he was gone, his footsteps quiet on the wood floor, the front door closing gently behind him. Charlotte stood in the center of her room, with a lock and a key and a man who said he wouldn't force her to do anything, and let herself cry. She cried for the 16-year-old girl who'd lost her parents, for the years of fear and control and bruises that no one saw because no one looked, for the desperate hope that had driven her to answer an advertisement from a stranger 1,000 miles away. And maybe, just a little, she cried with relief. When the tears stopped, she found the key in the dresser drawer, exactly where Caleb had said it would be. Heavy brass, solid in her palm. She turned it in the lock, heard the bolt slide home. Locked in, but also locked out, keeping the world at bay while she found her feet. Charlotte unpacked her carpet bag. It didn't take long. 3 dresses, undergarments, a nightgown, a book of poetry her mother had given her, a photograph of her parents on their wedding day. That was everything. She laid the photograph on the dresser, her parents' young faces smiling up at her. I think I might be safe here, she told them. I think I might have found someone good. The sun was setting when she heard Caleb return to the house. She heard him moving in the kitchen, the clank of pots, the pump handle squeaking. Smells of cooking drifted under her door, something simple but appealing. Charlotte washed her face in the basin, tidied her hair. She looked at herself in the small mirror above the dresser. Pale skin, dark circles under her eyes, hair that needed proper washing. She looked tired. She looked scared. But she didn't look broken. Not anymore. She unlocked her door and went to find Caleb. He was at the stove, stirring something in a pot. He'd changed his shirt, washed the trail dust from his face and hands. When he heard her footstep, he turned. Hey, he said. Just that. Hey. Hey, Charlotte echoed. Something smells good. Just stew, nothing special. I'm not much of a cook, but I can manage the basics. Can I help? Caleb looked surprised. If you want to, you don't have to. I know. Charlotte moved to the counter. But I'd like to, if that's all right. They worked together in comfortable silence. Charlotte sliced bread while Caleb ladled stew into bowls. They sat at the small table, the window behind them showing the last light fading from the sky. The stew was better than Caleb had claimed. Beef, potatoes, carrots, seasoned with herbs she couldn't quite identify. Real food, warm and filling. This is good, she said. Thank you. He paused. How are you? I mean, after the journey. Are you tired? Sore? Both. But all right. Charlotte took another bite, then asked, How long have you been here? In Colorado? 4 years. Came out from Ohio right after my mother passed. My sister's married, settled back east with her husband and kids. I wanted something different, land of my own. A fresh start. It's beautiful here. It is. Harsh sometimes. Winters are hard, and the summers can be brutal. But there's a peace to it. He looked out the window. No one telling you who to be or what to do, just you and the land and the work. Charlotte understood that better than he knew. They finished dinner, and Charlotte insisted on helping wash up despite Caleb's protests. When everything was clean and put away, an awkward moment descended. Evening stretched ahead, and neither of them quite knew how to navigate it. I usually read for a while before bed, Caleb said finally. You're welcome to sit by the fire, or if you'd rather have privacy. I'd like to sit by the fire, Charlotte said, if that's all right. Of course. Caleb built up the fire while Charlotte settled into the rocking chair. She'd brought her poetry book, but she didn't open it. Instead, she watched the flames dance and listened to the quiet sounds of the house settling. Caleb sat in the other chair with a book of his own, something about cattle ranching, she saw. They read in silence, the only sounds the crack of the fire and the occasional turn of a page. It was peaceful in a way Charlotte had never experienced. No tension, no waiting for anger to explode. Just two people sharing space. After an hour, Caleb closed his book. I usually turn in around 9, early mornings on a ranch. Charlotte nodded. I should sleep too. They stood, and for a moment they faced each other across the small room. Two strangers bound by letters and desperation and a strange, fragile hope. Good night, Charlotte, Caleb said softly. Good night, Caleb. Charlotte went to her room, closed the door, turned the lock. She changed into her nightgown and slipped under quilts that smelled of lavender and sunshine. The bed was comfortable, the room dark and quiet. She waited for fear to come, for the old nightmares, the old anxiety. Instead, she felt something else. She felt safe. For the first time in years, Charlotte Hale fell asleep without fear. And in the room down the hall, Caleb Whitmore lay awake thinking about bruises shaped like fingerprints, and a woman who flinched from kindness because cruelty was all she'd known. He thought about the 3 days ahead and what he would do if she chose to leave. He thought about the life he'd built here, solid and lonely, and how much more complete it felt with someone else in the house. He thought about the promises he'd made, to be honest, to be patient, to never make her afraid. And he promised himself he'd keep them, no matter what it cost. Morning came softly to the Colorado prairie. Charlotte woke to birdsong and golden light streaming through the curtains, disoriented for a moment before memory returned. The ranch, Caleb, the 3 days. She lay still, listening. Somewhere outside, a rooster crowed. Cattle lowed in the distance, and closer, from the kitchen, she heard the quiet sounds of someone moving carefully, trying not to wake her. Charlotte rose and dressed quickly in her simplest dress, twisted her hair into a loose bun, and unlocked her door. The house smelled of coffee and something baking. Caleb stood at the stove, his back to her, pouring coffee into 2 tin cups. He'd already been outside. His boots were dusty, and she could see dampness on his shirt from washing at the pump. Good morning, she said quietly. He turned, and she saw surprise cross his face. Morning. I didn't expect you to be up so early. It's barely past dawn. I'm used to early mornings. Charlotte moved into the kitchen. What are you making? Biscuits. They're nothing fancy, but they're edible. He gestured to the coffee pot. Help yourself. Cups are in the cabinet there. Charlotte poured coffee, added a spoonful of sugar from the bowl on the counter. The first sip was strong and hot, exactly what she needed. Did you sleep? Caleb asked. Better than I have in months. The admission surprised her, but it was true. You? Well enough. He pulled a pan from the oven, and the smell of fresh biscuits filled the kitchen. I've got work to do this morning, cattle to check, fences to mend, but I was thinking, if you wanted, I could show you around the ranch first. Let you get your bearings. I'd like that. They ate breakfast together at the small table, biscuits with butter and honey, eggs Caleb had collected from the chicken coop before she woke. Simple food, but prepared with care. Tell me about the ranch, Charlotte said. How did you choose this land? Caleb's face brightened slightly. I came out here 4 years ago with enough money saved to file a claim. Spent 2 months riding around looking at different parcels. Most men wanted land closer to town, easier access to markets. But when I found this valley, he paused, searching for words. The creek runs year-round. The grazing's good. There's shelter from the wind, timber for building. It felt right. You built the house yourself? With some help from neighbors. That's how it works out here. You help build someone's barn, they help build your house. Tom Morrison and Samuel Bridger. They both put in time. And I've done the same for others since. Charlotte tried to imagine it. Men working together, raising walls and roofs, building community along with structures. So different from Boston society, where neighbors competed more than they cooperated. After breakfast, Caleb led her outside. The morning air was cool and clear, the sky so blue it almost hurt to look at. He showed her the chicken coop first, introduced her to the dozen hens and 1 proud rooster. They're yours to manage if you want, he said. Egg money's traditionally the wife's income. You can sell extras in town, keep the profit for yourself. Charlotte reached into a nesting box, felt the warm smoothness of fresh eggs. Such a small thing, but it represented something larger. Autonomy. Her own income, however modest. They moved to the barn next. Inside, the air smelled of hay and horses and leather. 2 horses occupied stalls, the bays from yesterday, plus a smaller chestnut mare. "This is Clover," Caleb said, stroking the mare's nose. "She's gentle. If you want to learn to ride, she'd be good for that." "I've never ridden." "We can change that if you're interested. Being able to ride means freedom out here. You're not dependent on me to take you places." There was that word again, freedom. He seemed to offer it at every turn, as if he understood how precious it was to someone who'd been caged. They walked through the pastures, Caleb pointing out the cattle, explaining his plans for expanding the herd. He showed her the creek, cold and clear, lined with cottonwoods. He showed her the vegetable garden he'd started, but admitted he was terrible at maintaining. "I can do that," Charlotte said, looking at the neat rows struggling with weeds. "I helped in my mother's garden when I was young." "You don't have to." "I want to." She met his eyes. "I need to be useful, Caleb. I need to contribute." He studied her face for a moment. "You're useful just by being here. But if gardening brings you joy, then yes, please take it over. I'd be grateful." They were walking back toward the house when Charlotte asked the question that had been building in her mind. "Why did you really want a wife?" Caleb was quiet for several steps. "Honest answer? Please." "I was lonely." He said it simply, without shame. "I built a good life here. The ranch is doing well. I have friends in town, good neighbors. But at the end of the day, I'd come back to an empty house and eat dinner alone and wonder what the point was. Building something just for myself felt," he searched for the word, "incomplete." "You could have courted someone local." "There aren't many unmarried women in Stone Creek, and the ones who are, they have their pick of men, young men, charming men. I'm 32, Charlotte. I'm set in my ways. I work too much and talk too little. I'm not the kind of man women choose when they have better options." Charlotte stopped walking. "I don't believe that." "It's not self-pity, just fact." Caleb looked out at his land. "But through the mail, I could be honest about what I had to offer. A home, security, respect, and maybe somewhere there was a woman who valued those things more than charm or youth or excitement." "There was," Charlotte said softly. Their eyes met, and something passed between them, an understanding, fragile but real. The moment broke when a wagon appeared on the road, heading toward the house. "That'll be Margaret Chen," Caleb said. "I should have warned you. News travels fast out here. She'll have heard you arrived." Charlotte felt panic flutter in her chest. She wasn't ready for visitors, for questions, for the scrutiny of strangers. Caleb must have seen it in her face. "You don't have to see her if you're not ready. I can make an excuse." Charlotte took a breath. "No, it's fine. I should meet the neighbors." But it wasn't fine, not really. Her hands were shaking as they walked back to the house. Margaret Chen climbed down from her wagon with the energy of someone half her age. She was perhaps 40, Charlotte guessed, with shrewd dark eyes that missed nothing. She carried a basket covered with a checkered cloth. "Caleb Whitmore, did you really think I'd let a new bride arrive without bringing a proper welcome?" Margaret said, not waiting for an answer. She turned to Charlotte with a warm smile. "I brought food, soup, fresh bread, some preserves. Figured you'd both be too busy settling in to cook much." "That's very kind," Charlotte managed. "Not kindness, just sense. Now you must be exhausted from your journey. Come inside. Let me put this away while you sit down and tell me all about yourself." Before Charlotte could protest, Margaret had swept past them into the house. Caleb gave Charlotte an apologetic look. "She means well. She's just energetic." "I noticed." Inside, Margaret was already bustling around the kitchen, unpacking her basket and talking a steady stream. "The bread is sourdough. I started the culture myself 5 years ago. The soup is chicken with dumplings, just heated up for lunch. Preserves are strawberry from last summer's harvest. Oh, and I brought coffee beans because I know Caleb goes through them like water and probably doesn't have enough to share properly." She turned to Charlotte. "Now sit, both of you. Tell me how the journey was." They sat. Charlotte found herself answering Margaret's questions. Yes, the stagecoach was dusty and uncomfortable. Yes, she was from Boston originally. Yes, the landscape out here was very different from what she was used to. Margaret listened with genuine interest, but Charlotte could feel the unasked questions hovering. Why would a Boston woman come all the way out here to marry a stranger? What was she running from? I'm sure you're wondering why I answered Caleb's advertisement, Charlotte said, deciding to meet it head on. Margaret's expression softened. Honey, everyone out here is running from something or toward something, sometimes both. I came from San Francisco 15 years ago because my family didn't approve of Thomas. We built a life here from nothing. I don't judge. The tightness in Charlotte's chest eased slightly. But I will tell you this, Margaret continued. Caleb Whitmore is one of the good ones. He helped us rebuild the store after a fire 3 years ago, wouldn't take a penny for his labor. He sits with sick neighbors, brings food to families struggling through hard times. He doesn't talk much, but he shows up when it matters. Charlotte glanced at Caleb, who looked uncomfortable with the praise. What Margaret's too polite to mention, he said, is that she and Thomas saved my life my first winter here. I got caught in a blizzard checking my herd, nearly froze to death. They found me, brought me in, nursed me back to health. Because that's what neighbors do, Margaret said firmly. And that's what I'm here to tell you, Charlotte. You're not alone out here. You need anything, anything at all. You come to us. The other women, too. Sarah Morrison, Mary Bridger, even young Rebecca Johnson, who's homesteading with her family. We look out for each other. It was a promise and a warning, Charlotte realized. These people protected their own. They'd accepted her as Caleb's intended, but they'd be watching to make sure she was good to him too. Thank you, Charlotte said. I appreciate that more than you know. Margaret stood. I should let you get back to your day, but Charlotte, come visit me in town soon. The store's open Tuesday through Saturday, and I'm always happy to chat. Lord knows I could use more female conversation. After Margaret left, Charlotte and Caleb stood on the porch watching her wagon disappear down the road. She's a force of nature, Charlotte said. Caleb laughed, a real laugh that transformed his serious face. That's one way to put it, but she's right about what she said. The community out here, it's strong. People help each other. They spent the rest of the morning working, Caleb mending a section of fence while Charlotte attacked the vegetable garden. She found tools in the barn, gloves that were too large but serviceable. The physical work felt good, purposeful. Around midday, they heated Margaret's soup and ate lunch together. Charlotte found herself relaxing into the rhythm of the day, the simple pattern of work and meals and conversation. Tell me about your family, Caleb said. Before things got difficult. Charlotte set down her spoon. My father was a banker, conservative, careful with money, but he was kind. He used to bring me books from the city, anything I wanted to read. My mother was gentle. She loved her garden, loved music. They were happy together. How did they die? Cholera epidemic. It swept through Boston when I was 16. They got sick within days of each other. My mother went first, then my father 3 days later. Uncle Victor was my father's brother, the only family I had left. The court appointed him my guardian. And he was cruel from the start? No. Charlotte's voice went quiet. At first, he was almost kind. He let me stay in my family's house, said we'd manage my inheritance together. But after a few months, things changed. He started drinking more, making decisions without consulting me. When I questioned him, he'd get angry. The bruises? Charlotte nodded. They started about a year after I moved in with him, always where they wouldn't show. He was careful about that, and he told me if I said anything to anyone, he'd have me declared mentally unfit. He knew lawyers, judges. I believed him. Caleb's jaw was tight. For 5 years you lived like that. I tried to leave once, when I was 19. He found me within a day. After that, she closed her eyes. After that, he watched me more closely. But when I turned 21, the inheritance became legally mine. Uncle Victor knew that once I married or moved away, he'd lose control of it. He started pressuring me to marry his business partner's son, a man even worse than him. So you ran again. I ran. Charlotte opened her eyes. I saw your advertisement in a newspaper someone had left at a cafe. No family ties preferred. Those words felt like permission to escape. I withdrew as much money as I could without alerting my uncle, bought a ticket west, and left everything else behind. Caleb reached across the table and covered her hand with his. The touch was gentle, asking permission even as it offered comfort. "You're safe now," he said. "I give you my word." Charlotte wanted to believe him, but trust was a muscle she'd forgotten how to use. That afternoon, Caleb taught her to pump water from the well, showed her where he kept feed for the chickens, explained the routine of the ranch. Charlotte absorbed it all, building a mental map of this new life. As evening approached, they worked together to prepare dinner. Charlotte made biscuits while Caleb fried salt pork and potatoes. They moved around each other in the small kitchen with surprising ease, as if they'd been doing this for years instead of hours. Over dinner, Caleb asked, "What did you do in Boston? Before?" "I read, mostly. My uncle didn't like me leaving the house without him, but I had my father's library. I'd lose myself in books for hours." "What kind of books?" "Everything. Poetry, novels, philosophy, history. Books were my escape." Caleb stood and left the room. He returned carrying 3 books. "These are mine. Not much, but you're welcome to them." Charlotte looked at the titles: a collection of Shakespeare's plays, a book of Emerson's essays, a worn copy of Whitman's poetry. "You read Whitman?" she asked, surprised. Caleb looked embarrassed. "I'm not educated formally, only had schooling through 8th grade, but I like to read when I can." "Whitman. I don't always understand it, but something about it speaks to me." Charlotte opened the book, saw marginalia in neat handwriting. Caleb had been engaging with the poetry, questioning it, thinking about it. "I am large, I contain multitude," she read aloud. "Do you think that's true? That we can be contradictory and still whole?" "I think it has to be," Caleb said quietly. "Otherwise, how could someone like me, someone who wants to be gentle but was raised by violence, ever be anything but broken?" The vulnerability in his voice made Charlotte's throat tight. "You're not broken. Neither are you." They held each other's gaze across the table, 2 wounded people beginning to believe they might heal. That night, Charlotte sat by the fire reading Whitman while Caleb worked on ranch accounts. The silence between them was comfortable, companionable. When she looked up, she sometimes found him watching her, his expression soft. "Can I ask you something?" Charlotte said. "Anything. What would you want from a marriage? Not the practical things, but what would make you happy?" Caleb set down his pencil, considering. "Partnership. Someone to build this life with, not just exist alongside. Conversation. Laughter when we can find it. Children, maybe, if that's something you'd want. But mostly," he paused. "Mostly, I'd want you to be happy here, whatever that looks like for you. And if what makes me happy isn't what you expected, then we'd figure it out together. Marriage isn't about one person surrendering to another's vision. It's about creating something new together." Charlotte felt something shift inside her, like ice beginning to thaw. The second day passed in a similar rhythm. Morning chores, a visit from Sheriff Tom Morrison, who came by ostensibly to discuss cattle rustlers in the area, but really to check on Charlotte. Afternoon work, Charlotte in the garden, Caleb mending harnesses. Evening meals and quiet conversation. Tom Morrison was friendly, open-faced, with laugh lines around his eyes, and an easy manner that put Charlotte somewhat at ease. "My wife Sarah wants to meet you," he said over coffee in the kitchen. "She's pregnant with our 3rd, supposed to be taking it easy, but she's about ready to burst with curiosity about Caleb's bride." "I'd like to meet her too," Charlotte said, meaning it. "How about tomorrow afternoon? Sarah's got a sewing circle that meets at our place. Just a few of the local women, Sarah, Margaret, Mary Bridger, sometimes Rebecca Johnson, if she can get away from the homestead. They'd love to have you." Charlotte felt panic rise again. A room full of women, all wanting to know about the stranger who'd come to marry Caleb Whitmore. Caleb must have sensed her hesitation. "Charlotte doesn't have to—" "I'll come," Charlotte interrupted. Both men looked at her in surprise. "I should meet people. Start building connections." After Tom left, Caleb turned to her. "You don't have to go if you're not ready." "I know, but I can't hide forever." Charlotte took a breath. "Besides, if I'm going to live here, I need to be part of the community." "If?" Caleb's voice was carefully neutral. "You said, if I'm going to live here." Charlotte realized what she'd revealed. I meant when." "Did you?" They stood facing each other in the kitchen, the air between them charged with unspoken questions. I don't know, Charlotte admitted. I feel safe here, Caleb. Safer than I've felt in years, but I'm also terrified. Of me? Of hoping. Of believing this could be real. Of letting myself want something and then having it taken away. Caleb nodded slowly. That's fair. Hope is a risk. How do you do it? How do you trust that things will work out? I don't always, he said honestly, but I've learned that the alternative, never hoping, never risking, that's not really living, it's just surviving. Charlotte thought about that as she prepared for bed that night. Surviving versus living. She'd been surviving for 5 years. Maybe it was time to try living. The third day dawned cold and gray, clouds gathering over the mountains. Caleb frowned at the sky over breakfast. Storm coming. I need to move the cattle to lower pasture before it hits. Can I help? He looked surprised. You don't know how to ride. Then teach me. You said Clover was gentle. Caleb studied her face, then nodded. All right, but we need to move fast. That storm's coming in quicker than I'd like. He saddled Clover while explaining the basics. How to mount, how to hold the reins, how to guide with subtle pressure. Charlotte listened intently, trying not to show her nervousness. Mounting was awkward, ungraceful, but she managed. Clover stood patiently while Charlotte found her balance. Good, Caleb said from atop his own horse. Now, just follow me. Let Clover do most of the work. She knows the way. They rode out toward the pasture where the cattle grazed. Charlotte clung to the saddle horn at first, every muscle tense. But gradually, she began to feel the rhythm of Clover's movement, began to trust that the mare wouldn't throw her. The cattle were restless, sensing the approaching storm. Caleb moved among them with practiced ease, guiding them toward the path that led to lower ground. Charlotte stayed back, watching how he worked, how the cattle responded to his calm authority. Then one of the younger steers broke away, heading up the slope instead of down. Charlotte, Caleb called, can you turn him? Just ride in front of him. Let Clover block his path. Charlotte's heart hammered, but she nudged Clover forward. The mare responded immediately, moving to intercept the wayward steer. The animal stopped, looked at them, then turned back toward the herd. Perfect, Caleb shouted over the rising wind. You're a natural. Pride bloomed in Charlotte's chest. She'd done something useful, something brave. They got the cattle moved just as the first raindrops fell. By the time they reached the barn, the sky had opened up completely. They dismounted and led the horses inside, both of them soaked and laughing. That was incredible, Charlotte said, breathless and exhilarated. I've never done anything like that. Caleb grinned, water dripping from his hair. You did great, really great. They stood in the barn, rain drumming on the roof, both breathing hard from the ride. Charlotte felt alive in a way she couldn't remember feeling before. Not just safe, alive. Thank you, she said. For what? For letting me help. For teaching me, for... She gestured helplessly. For all of it. Caleb's expression grew serious. Charlotte, I need to ask you something, and I need you to be honest. Her breath caught. All right. Tomorrow's the third day. Reverend Taylor will be here in the afternoon to perform the ceremony, if you want him to. But I need to know, do you want to marry me? Not because you're afraid to go back, not because you feel obligated, but because you actually want this life? Charlotte looked at him. This quiet, honest man who'd given her space and respect and the freedom to choose. Who'd taught her to ride and valued her help and asked for her happiness above his own convenience. I'm still scared, she said quietly. I know. I don't know if I can be a proper wife. If I can be, intimate. Not yet. I know that too. But I want to try. Charlotte took a breath. I want to stay. I want to build a life here. With you. Caleb's face transformed. Yeah? Yeah. He stepped forward slowly, giving her time to retreat if she wanted. When she didn't move, he reached out and took her hand. Then I'll spend every day trying to be worthy of that choice, he said. Thunder rolled across the prairie as they stood hand in hand in the barn, two people choosing each other despite fear, despite past wounds, despite uncertainty. Outside, the storm raged. Inside, something new was beginning to grow. The rain had stopped by morning, leaving the prairie washed clean and sparkling. Charlotte woke to sunlight and the sound of Caleb already moving around the house. Her wedding day. She dressed carefully in her best dress, a simple blue cotton that brought out her eyes. Her hands trembled as she pinned up her hair, and she had to start over twice before getting it right. When she emerged from her room, Caleb was setting breakfast on the table. He'd shaved, put on clean clothes, dark pants, a white shirt, a vest that looked new. He looked handsome in a rugged, unpretentious way. "Morning," he said, his voice slightly rough. "I made eggs, and there's coffee." "Thank you." Charlotte sat, but neither of them ate much. The air between them felt charged with anticipation and nervousness. "Are you all right?" Caleb asked finally. "I think so." "You?" "Terrified," he admitted with a small smile. "I faced down charging cattle and winter blizzards, but the idea of saying vows in front of witnesses has me more nervous than anything." Charlotte felt some of her own tension ease. "I'm glad I'm not the only one." They cleaned up breakfast together, moving around each other with the ease they'd developed over 3 days. Margaret Chen arrived first, bustling in with her husband Thomas, a quiet man who nodded greetings but let his wife do most of the talking. "I brought flowers from my garden," Margaret announced, producing a bouquet of wildflowers and prairie blooms. "Every bride should have flowers." Charlotte accepted them with genuine gratitude. "They're beautiful." "And I brought my good camera," Thomas added. "Thought you might want a photograph to mark the day." More people arrived, Sheriff Tom Morrison with his very pregnant wife Sarah, who embraced Charlotte like they were old friends. Samuel and Mary Bridger, both in their 60s, weathered and kind. A few other ranchers from neighboring spreads. Even young Rebecca Johnson, barely 20, made the long ride from her family's homestead. The house filled with voices and laughter. Charlotte felt overwhelmed but also touched. These people had come to witness her marriage, to welcome her into their community. Reverend Taylor arrived precisely at 2 o'clock. A rail-thin man in his 50s with gentle eyes and a booming voice that seemed too large for his frame. "Caleb Whitmore," he called out. "Heard you finally found yourself a bride. Let's make this official before she comes to her senses." Laughter rippled through the gathered crowd. Caleb shook the Reverend's hand, then turned to Charlotte. "Ready?" he asked quietly. Charlotte looked at the people filling his house, her house now, at Margaret beaming with maternal pride, at Sarah Morrison dabbing her eyes even though the ceremony hadn't started, at Caleb, steady and honest and offering her a life she could choose. "Ready," she said. They stood before Reverend Taylor in the small front room. Everyone else crowded around, filling the space with warmth and witness. The Reverend opened his worn Bible. "Dearly beloved, we are gathered here today to join this man and this woman in holy matrimony." Charlotte listened to the familiar words, but her attention kept drifting to Caleb's face. He was looking at her with such quiet intensity, such hope. "Do you, Caleb James Whitmore, take this woman to be your lawfully wedded wife, to have and to hold from this day forward, for better or worse, for richer or poorer, in sickness and in health, to love and to cherish, till death do you part?" "I do." Caleb's voice was clear, unwavering. "And do you, Charlotte Ann Hale, take this man to be your lawfully wedded husband, to have and to hold from this day forward, for better or worse, for richer or poorer, in sickness and in health, to love and to cherish, till death do you part?" Charlotte took a breath. This was it. The moment where she chose her future. "I do." Caleb slipped a simple gold band onto her finger. She hadn't even known he had rings prepared. Then she slid a matching band onto his, her hands only shaking slightly. "By the power vested in me by the territory of Colorado, I now pronounce you husband and wife. Caleb, you may kiss your bride." Caleb looked at Charlotte, a question in his eyes. She gave the slightest nod. He leaned in and pressed a gentle kiss to her lips, brief, chaste, but full of promise. The room erupted in cheers and applause. Charlotte felt tears on her cheeks and wasn't entirely sure when they'd started falling. Margaret was crying openly. Sarah Morrison had progressed to full sobs, which her husband assured everyone were just pregnancy hormones. "Welcome to the family, Mrs. Whitmore," Margaret said, pulling Charlotte into a tight embrace. "Mrs. Whitmore." "Charlotte Whitmore," She tested the name in her mind and found it fit better than she'd expected. The afternoon dissolved into celebration. Someone had brought fiddles, and soon music filled the house. The furniture was pushed back and couples began to dance. Food appeared: roasted chicken, fresh bread, pies and cakes that the neighboring women had brought. Caleb led Charlotte through her first dance, guiding her patiently through the steps she didn't know. "Are you happy?" he asked as they swayed to the music. Charlotte considered the question honestly. "I think I am, or I'm starting to be." "That's enough," Caleb said. "That's more than enough." As the sun began to set, the guests gradually departed. Tom and Sarah Morrison were the last to leave, Sarah gripping Charlotte's hands. "If you need anything at all, you send word," she said. "Women out here, we look after each other." "I will, thank you." When everyone was gone, Charlotte and Caleb stood on the porch watching the last wagon disappear down the road. The house behind them was a mess, dishes everywhere, furniture askew, the detritus of celebration. "We should clean up," Charlotte said without much enthusiasm. "It can wait until morning." Caleb turned to face her. "Charlotte, I want you to know nothing has to change tonight. You can lock your door, same as always. I meant what I said about giving you time." Charlotte looked at this man who was now her husband. "What if I don't want to lock it?" Caleb's eyes widened slightly. "What are you saying?" "I'm saying I'd like to try. Not everything. But maybe we could just talk. In your room instead of by the fire?" "Are you sure?" "No," Charlotte admitted, "but I want to try anyway." They cleaned up the worst of the mess together. Then Caleb led the way to his room. Charlotte had never been inside before. It was simple, like the rest of the house. A larger bed than hers, a dresser, a washstand, a window that looked out toward the mountains. Caleb gestured vaguely toward the door. "I'll give you privacy to change." Charlotte changed into her nightgown, her heart racing. When she called that she was ready, Caleb came back in wearing his own nightclothes, simple cotton pants and a shirt. They sat on opposite sides of the bed, awkward as teenagers. "This is strange," Charlotte said. "Very strange," Caleb agreed. Then he laughed, and Charlotte found herself laughing too, and suddenly the tension broke. "Tell me something about yourself I don't know," Charlotte said, pulling her knees up to her chest. "Something small." Caleb thought for a moment. "I'm afraid of snakes. Completely terrified. Which is ridiculous for a rancher, but there it is." Charlotte smiled. "I can't whistle. Everyone in my family could whistle, but I never learned how." "I'll teach you. I'll protect you from snakes." They traded small confessions back and forth. Favorite foods, childhood memories, embarrassing moments. Caleb told her about the time he'd fallen off his horse trying to impress a girl when he was 15. Charlotte told him about accidentally setting her mother's curtains on fire while reading by candlelight. Hours passed. The candle burned low. Charlotte found herself lying down, her head on the pillow, Caleb lying beside her, close but not touching. "Can I hold your hand?" he asked. Charlotte nodded. His fingers intertwined with hers, warm and calloused and gentle. "This is nice," she whispered. "Yeah," Caleb agreed. "It really is." Charlotte fell asleep like that, hand in hand with her husband, feeling safer than she'd ever felt in her life. The weeks that followed fell into a comfortable rhythm. Charlotte took over the household tasks with enthusiasm, cooking, cleaning, tending the garden that began to flourish under her care. She learned to gather eggs without the hens pecking her, to churn butter, to bake bread that actually rose properly. Caleb taught her to ride more confidently, and soon she was accompanying him on ranch work. She learned to spot sick cattle, to mend fences, to tell when a storm was coming by the way the animals behaved. At night, they shared his bed, talking until they fell asleep. Caleb never pressured her for more, seemed content with the intimacy of conversation and presence. "I never thought marriage could be like this," Charlotte said one night, several weeks in. "Like what?" "Easy. Comfortable. Like we're on the same side." Caleb rolled to face her. "We are on the same side. Always." Charlotte had started attending the weekly sewing circle at Sarah Morrison's house. The women had welcomed her warmly, and she found herself genuinely enjoying their company. They taught her to quilt, shared recipes, gossiped about harmless town news. One afternoon in late spring, Margaret Chen pulled her aside. "You're looking happier," Margaret observed. "More settled." "I am," Charlotte admitted. "I didn't think I could be, but I am." "Caleb's good for you, and you're good for him. That man was turning into a hermit before you arrived." Charlotte smiled. "He's a good man." "He is, which is why I'm going to tell you something." Margaret's voice dropped. "A stranger was in the store last week, asking questions about new arrivals to Stone Creek, particularly women traveling alone." Charlotte's blood ran cold. "What did he look like?" "Older, maybe 50, well-dressed, had that look of someone used to getting his way, said his name was Victor." The name hit Charlotte like a physical blow. She must have swayed because Margaret gripped her arm. "I thought it might be trouble," Margaret said, "so I told him we hadn't seen anyone matching that description. But Charlotte, if someone's looking for you—" "My uncle," Charlotte whispered. "He found me." She told Margaret everything then. The inheritance, the abuse, the escape. Margaret listened with growing outrage. "That man has no right to you," Margaret said fiercely. "You're married now. Legally, you're Caleb's wife. Your uncle has no claim." "You don't know him. He's powerful. He knows lawyers, judges. He could try," Margaret interrupted, "but he's not in Boston anymore. He's in Colorado, where we protect our own. You tell Caleb, today. He needs to know what might be coming." Charlotte rode home with her heart in her throat. She found Caleb in the barn, repairing a saddle. "Caleb," she said, her voice shaking, "we need to talk." He looked up, saw her face, and immediately set down his tools. "What happened?" She told him about Margaret's visitor, watched his expression shift from concern to anger. "He's here," Caleb said flatly, "in Stone Creek." Margaret didn't tell him anything. "But Caleb, he won't give up. The inheritance, he needs that money. He'll try to take me back, claim I'm mentally unfit, or that our marriage isn't legal, or—" Caleb gripped her shoulders gently. "Charlotte, look at me." She met his eyes. "He's not taking you anywhere," Caleb said. "You're my wife. You're under my protection. And I'm not your uncle. I won't let anyone hurt you." "You don't understand. He's ruthless. Then he'll learn that I can be ruthless too when it comes to protecting what's mine." Caleb's voice was steel wrapped in velvet. "We'll go to town tomorrow. We'll talk to Tom Morrison. Make sure the law knows the situation. We'll make it clear to everyone that you're here by choice, that you're married, that you're staying." Charlotte wanted to believe him, but fear that had been dormant for weeks came roaring back. That night, she locked her door for the first time since the wedding. She heard Caleb try the handle, heard his soft knock. "Charlotte, can we talk?" I need to be alone tonight." A pause. "All right. I'm here if you need me." Charlotte lay awake in the darkness, listening to her racing heart. She'd been foolish to think she could escape. Victor Hale never let go of anything he considered his. Morning came too soon. Caleb was already dressed when she emerged, his face drawn with worry. "We're going to town," he said. "Tom needs to know about this." The ride to Stone Creek was tense and silent. Charlotte kept scanning the horizon, half expecting her uncle to appear from nowhere. Tom Morrison listened to their story in his office, his friendly expression hardening into something more serious. "So your uncle's looking for you, and there's money involved," he summarized. "That's a bad combination." "Can he legally claim her?" Caleb asked. "Force her to return to Boston?" Tom shook his head. "Not legally, no. She's an adult. She's married. Under territorial law, she's your responsibility now, not his. But that doesn't mean he won't try other methods." "Like what?" Charlotte asked. "Intimidation, manipulation. He might try to claim you're being held against your will, or that you're mentally incompetent to make your own decisions." Tom looked at Charlotte seriously. "I need you to tell me, and I need the truth. Are you here of your own free will?" "Yes," Charlotte said firmly. "Did Caleb coerce you in any way?" "No. He gave me 3 days to decide. He offered to send me anywhere I wanted if I chose not to marry him." "And the marriage? It's been consummated?" Charlotte felt heat rise to her cheeks, but she met Tom's eyes. "That's between me and my husband. But I'm here by choice. I want to stay." Tom nodded, satisfied. "Then legally, there's nothing your uncle can do." "But Charlotte, If he shows up, you don't talk to him alone. You make sure there are witnesses. And if he threatens you in any way, you come straight to me." They were leaving the sheriff's office when a voice called out behind them. "Charlotte!" Charlotte froze. That voice, cultured, commanding, edged with steel. She turned slowly. Victor Hale stood in the middle of Stone Creek's main street, flanked by two men Charlotte didn't recognize. Her uncle looked exactly as she remembered, tall, distinguished, with silver hair and cold eyes that missed nothing. "Uncle Victor," she managed, her voice barely steady. "You've led me on quite a chase, my dear." Victor's smile was thin and didn't reach his eyes. "But I've found you now. It's time to come home." Caleb moved to stand beside Charlotte, his presence solid and protective. "She is home." Victor's gaze shifted to Caleb, dismissive and contemptuous. "And you are?" "Caleb Whitmore, Charlotte's husband." "Husband." Victor said the word like it tasted foul. "How convenient. How long have you known my niece, Mr. Whitmore? A month? 2? "Long enough to know she doesn't want to go with you," Caleb said evenly. "Charlotte is not in her right mind to make such decisions. She's clearly been influenced, possibly even threatened into this arrangement." Victor looked past Caleb to Charlotte. "Did this man force you to marry him? Tell me the truth, and I'll have you back in Boston by week's end." Charlotte felt the old fear trying to claw its way up her throat, but something else rose with it: anger. "No one forced me," she said, her voice growing stronger. "I married Caleb because I chose to. I left Boston because you were cruel and controlling, and I was tired of being afraid." Victor's expression hardened. "Careful, Charlotte. You're speaking of family." "You're not my family. You were my jailer. I was your guardian. I protected you, managed your inheritance." "You stole from me," Charlotte interrupted. "You used my father's money for your own purposes. You controlled every aspect of my life. You hurt me." The crowd was gathering, drawn by the confrontation. Margaret Chen appeared in the doorway of her store. Tom Morrison stepped forward, hand resting casually on his gun belt. "Is there a problem here?" Tom asked mildly. Victor turned his cold gaze to the sheriff. "I'm here to collect my niece, who has clearly been manipulated by this rancher. I have legal guardianship papers, which expired when she turned 21, Tom said, "and became completely void when she married. Charlotte Whitmore is an adult, married woman. She's not going anywhere she doesn't want to go." "Sheriff, I don't think you understand the situation." "I understand it fine." Tom's voice lost its mild tone. "A woman is telling you she doesn't want to go with you. In my territory, that's the end of the discussion." Victor's jaw tightened. "Charlotte, be reasonable. You can't possibly want to stay in this primitive place. You belong in Boston, in society, with your own kind." "My own kind?" Charlotte felt Caleb's hand find hers, steadying her. "My own kind are people who treat me with respect, who give me choices, who don't leave bruises on my arms when I displease them." A murmur ran through the growing crowd. Victor's face flushed with anger. "You ungrateful girl, after everything I did for you." "You did nothing for me," Charlotte said. "You did everything to me, but I'm not under your control anymore." Victor took a step forward. Caleb moved slightly, putting himself between Victor and Charlotte. "That's close enough," Caleb said quietly. The two men who'd arrived with Victor shifted, hands moving toward their coats. But Tom Morrison's voice cut through the tension. "Gentlemen, I'd advise keeping your hands where I can see them. This is a peaceful town, and I aim to keep it that way." Victor looked around at the hostile faces surrounding him, townspeople who'd come out of shops and homes standing with the Whitmores. He was outnumbered and outmaneuvered, and he knew it. "This isn't over," he said to Charlotte. "You're making a terrible mistake." "No," Charlotte said. "Leaving you was the first good decision I've made in years." Victor stared at her for a long moment, then turned on his heel and strode toward the hotel, his two companions following. Charlotte's legs went weak. Caleb caught her, supporting her weight. "You did it," he whispered. "You stood up to him." "We did it," Charlotte corrected, leaning into her husband's strength. The crowd began to disperse, but not before several people stopped to pat Charlotte on the shoulder or murmur words of support. Margaret embraced her fiercely. "That man's a snake," Margaret said, "but he's been put in his place." Tom Morrison approached, his expression serious. He'll leave town, but I don't think he'll give up entirely. Be careful. Watch your backs. They rode home in the afternoon light, Charlotte still shaking from the confrontation. But underneath the fear was something else, a small, fierce pride. She'd stood up to Victor Hale. She'd told the truth in front of witnesses. She hadn't backed down. "You were incredible," Caleb said as they neared the ranch. "The way you faced him, Charlotte, you were so strong." I was terrified. Being brave doesn't mean not being afraid. It means being afraid and doing it anyway. That night, Charlotte didn't lock her door. She went to Caleb's room, climbed into their bed, and let him hold her while she shook with the aftermath of adrenaline and emotion. "What if he comes back?" she whispered. "What if he finds a way to take me?" "He won't," Caleb said firmly. "You have a whole town behind you now. You have me. And Charlotte, you have yourself. You're not that scared girl anymore. You proved that today." Charlotte wanted to believe him. But as she drifted toward sleep, she couldn't shake the memory of Victor's eyes, cold, calculating, and full of promises that this wasn't finished. 3 days passed with no sign of Victor Hale. Charlotte began to relax slightly, throwing herself into work around the ranch. The garden was thriving, the chickens were laying well, and she'd even started helping Caleb with the cattle branding. On the 4th day, Charlotte was alone at the ranch. Caleb had ridden to the Morrison place to help Tom repair a barn roof. She was in the garden, pulling weeds, when she heard horses approaching. Charlotte looked up to see 3 riders. Victor Hale in the center, his 2 companions flanking him. Terror flooded through her, but Charlotte forced herself to stand tall. She had as much right to this land as anyone. "Charlotte," Victor called as he dismounted, "I came to speak with you privately. Man to man, as it were. Your husband and I couldn't have a reasonable conversation, but perhaps you and I can." "My husband is not here," Charlotte said, proud that her voice didn't shake. "And I have nothing to say to you that I didn't say in town. Please, give me 5 minutes, that's all I ask." Charlotte knew she should refuse, should send him away, but part of her wanted this confrontation, wanted to prove, to him and to herself, that she wasn't afraid anymore. "5 minutes," she said. "We'll talk on the porch. Your men stay with the horses." Victor nodded to his companions, who remained mounted. He followed Charlotte to the porch, and they stood facing each other across the weathered wood. "This is beneath you," Victor began. "Living on a primitive ranch, married to an uneducated rancher. You were raised for better things." "I was raised to be controlled by you," Charlotte countered. "That's not better, it's worse. I admit I was harsh sometimes. The drink made me eat less than I should have been. But Charlotte, I can change. Come back to Boston. We'll start fresh." "No. Think about what you're throwing away. Society, culture, the money your father left you. The money you stole, you mean." Victor's mask of civility slipped for just a moment, revealing the anger beneath. "I managed that money responsibly. I invested it. Without me, you would have squandered it. Without you, it would have been mine to squander or save as I chose." "You're being foolish and stubborn." Victor's voice took on a harder edge. "If you don't come willingly, I'll be forced to take legal action. I have evidence that you're mentally incompetent. I have doctors willing to testify. Doctors you've paid," Charlotte said. "It won't work, Uncle Victor. I'm not coming back." Victor studied her, and Charlotte saw calculation in his eyes. "Perhaps not. But I wonder, have you told your husband everything? Does he know about your episodes? The times you claimed to hear voices?" Charlotte's blood ran cold. "I never—" "Didn't you? When you were 17, after your mother died, you told the doctor you heard her calling to you. That was documented, Charlotte. It's in your medical records." "I was grieving," Charlotte said, her voice shaking now. "I was a child who'd lost her mother. The court might see it differently, might question your current mental state, might wonder if this marriage is even valid." Victor smiled coldly. "Might wonder if your husband married you under false pretenses." The threat was clear. If Charlotte didn't come with him, he'd destroy her reputation, her marriage, everything she'd built here. "You can't do that," Charlotte whispered. "Can I? I have resources, connections. I can make your life here very difficult, Charlotte. Or," he paused, "you could simply come home. I'll let you keep your little ranch husband. He can visit Boston. We'll work something out. Charlotte felt walls closing in, the old helplessness threatening to swallow her whole. Victor had found her weakness, not fear for herself, but fear for what he could do to Caleb, to the life they were building. Then she heard it. Hoofbeats. Coming fast. Caleb appeared over the rise, riding hard. He must have seen the strange horses from a distance, known something was wrong. He dismounted before his horse had fully stopped, striding toward the porch with fury in his eyes. "Get away from my wife," Caleb said, his voice deadly quiet. Victor turned, unhurried. "We're just talking, Mr. Whitmore, having a family discussion. You're not her family. You're a man who abused her for years and is now trying to manipulate her into going back." Caleb's hands were clenched into fists. "Leave. Now." "Or what? You'll strike me? In front of witnesses?" Victor gestured to his men. "That would be assault, Mr. Whitmore. I could have you arrested." "I'm not going to hit you," Caleb said. "I'm going to stand here while my wife tells you to leave. And then you're going to leave. Because if you don't, I'll have the sheriff out here within the hour, and we'll discuss how you're trespassing on private property and threatening a citizen of this territory." Victor looked between them, weighing his options. Whatever he saw in their faces made him recalculate. "This isn't over," he said. "Charlotte, you're making a mistake. When you realize that, when this little frontier fantasy falls apart, don't come crying to me." "I won't," Charlotte said, finding her voice again. "Because it won't fall apart. This is real. This is my life, and you have no place in it." Victor's face hardened with rage, and for a moment Charlotte saw the man who'd left bruises on her arms. His hand twitched, rising slightly as if to strike her. Caleb moved like lightning, catching Victor's wrist midair. "Don't," Caleb said, his voice like gravel. "Don't even think about it." The two men stood frozen for a heartbeat, Victor's arm trapped in Caleb's iron grip. Then Caleb released him and stepped back. "Ride away," Caleb said, "and don't come back." Victor rubbed his wrist, eyes blazing with humiliation and fury. "You have no idea who you're dealing with." "Neither do you," Caleb replied. Victor stalked to his horse and mounted. Before riding off, he looked back at Charlotte one last time. "You'll regret this," he said. But Charlotte saw something in his eyes she'd never seen before. Defeat. Victor Hale had lost, and he knew it. The three riders disappeared over the horizon. Charlotte stood on the porch, trembling now that it was over. Caleb turned to her, cupping her face in his hands. "Are you all right? Did he hurt you?" "No, he threatened to claim I'm mentally unstable, to invalidate our marriage." "He can try. It won't work." Caleb's thumbs brushed away tears Charlotte hadn't realized were falling. "You're not alone in this, Charlotte. You have me. You have this whole community. We won't let him take you." Charlotte threw her arms around her husband, burying her face in his shoulder. Caleb held her tight, one hand stroking her hair. "I was so scared," she whispered. "I know. But you faced him anyway. You stood your ground." He pulled back to look at her. "Charlotte, you're the bravest person I know." "I don't feel brave." "You don't have to feel it to be it." They stood like that for a long time, holding each other while the sun moved across the sky. Eventually, Charlotte pulled back. "He won't give up easily," she said. "Probably not, but we're ready for him now." Caleb's jaw was set with determination. "And Charlotte? If he tries anything at all, he'll learn that I protect what's mine." Charlotte looked at this man who'd become her husband, her partner, her shield. "I'm not a possession to be protected." "No," Caleb agreed. "You're a person worth fighting for. There's a difference." That night they lay in bed together, neither sleeping. Charlotte's mind kept replaying the confrontation, Victor's threats, the way Caleb had stepped between them without hesitation. "Can I ask you something?" she said into the darkness. "Anything." "Why me? Out of all the women who might have answered your advertisement, why did you choose me?" Caleb was quiet for a moment. "Your first letter. You wrote about wanting a partner, not a provider, about building something together rather than being taken care of. Most of the other letters talked about what they wanted from me. You talked about what we could create together." Charlotte turned to face him. "I meant that." "I know. That's why I chose you." She kissed him then, surprising them both. It was gentle, tentative, but it carried everything she couldn't yet say out loud. When they parted, Caleb's eyes were dark with emotion. "Charlotte, I know we said we'd take things slow, and we will. But I want you to know." She took a breath. "I'm not afraid of you, not anymore. When I'm ready for more, it'll be because I choose it, because I want you, not because I feel obligated." Caleb touched his forehead to hers. "Take all the time you need. I'll be here." Charlotte fell asleep in her husband's arms, and for the first time since Victor's arrival, she felt the fear begin to loosen its grip. The monster from her past had found her. But she wasn't alone anymore, and that made all the difference. 2 weeks passed with no further sign of Victor Hale. Charlotte tried to relax back into the rhythm of ranch life, but she found herself watching the horizon constantly, waiting for her uncle to reappear with whatever new scheme he'd devised. Caleb noticed, of course. He always noticed. "He's gone back to Boston," he said one morning over breakfast. "Tom sent a telegram to a contact he has in Denver. Victor Hale bought a train ticket east 3 days after our confrontation." Charlotte felt some of the tension leave her shoulders. "You're sure?" "As sure as I can be." Tom's contact confirmed he boarded the train. Caleb reached across the table and took her hand. "You can breathe again." But Charlotte had learned that freedom came with a price of constant vigilance. He could come back. "He could," Caleb agreed. "But if he does, we'll handle it. Together." The word settled something in Charlotte's chest. Together. Not her facing it alone, not Caleb fighting her battles for her, but the two of them standing side by side. Summer deepened across the prairie. The garden Charlotte had nursed through spring exploded with abundance. Tomatoes, squash, beans, carrots. She spent long days preserving food for winter, teaching herself to can from a book Margaret had loaned her. The work was hard, hot, exhausting. It was also deeply satisfying. "You've put up more food than we could eat in 2 winters, Caleb observed one evening, surveying the shelves lined with jars of vegetables and preserves. "We might have a hard winter," Charlotte said, "and if neighbors need help, we'll have plenty to share," Caleb finished, smiling. "You're thinking like a rancher's wife." Charlotte felt a flush of pride. She was thinking like a rancher's wife, because she was one. This wasn't a role she was playing or a temporary refuge. This was her life. That night, as they lay in bed, Charlotte turned to face Caleb in the darkness. "I want to tell you something," she said. "All right?" "When I first came here, I thought I was just surviving, finding a safe place to hide." She took a breath. "But somewhere along the way, that changed. I'm not hiding anymore. I'm living." Caleb's hand found hers under the covers. "I'm glad. And I want—" Charlotte felt her cheeks heat even in the darkness. "I want more. With you. I'm ready." She felt Caleb go very still beside her. "Charlotte, you don't have to." "I know I don't have to. That's the whole point." She rolled toward him, her hand finding his chest, feeling his heartbeat quicken under her palm. "I want to. I want you." "Are you sure?" In answer, Charlotte kissed him. Not the gentle, chaste kisses they'd shared before, but something deeper, more urgent. Caleb responded with a hunger that made her breath catch, his hands moving to cup her face, then sliding into her hair. "Tell me if you want to stop," he murmured against her lips. "Any time. I'll stop." "I don't want to stop." What followed was tender and awkward and perfect. Caleb was patient, careful, constantly checking that she was all right. Charlotte discovered that intimacy chosen freely was nothing like intimacy forced or feared. This was connection, vulnerability, trust made physical. Afterward, they lay tangled together, Charlotte's head on Caleb's chest, listening to his heartbeat slow. "I love you," she whispered. She felt Caleb's sharp intake of breath. "Say that again." "I love you, Caleb Whitmore." Charlotte raised her head to look at him. "I think I have for a while now. I was just too scared to admit it." Caleb's eyes were bright in the moonlight streaming through the window. "I love you too. I think I loved you from that first day, when you stepped off the stagecoach looking terrified but trying so hard to be brave." Charlotte kissed him again, slow and sweet. We should probably sleep. Probably, Caleb agreed, but neither of them moved, content to simply hold each other. Charlotte woke before dawn feeling different, not just because of what had happened between her and Caleb, but because something had shifted fundamentally inside her. The fear that had lived in her chest for years, the constant vigilance, the waiting for the other shoe to drop. It had quieted. She wasn't naive. She knew life could still bring pain, that Victor might return, that hardships lay ahead. But she also knew she was strong enough to face them. Over the following weeks, Charlotte and Caleb's marriage deepened in ways both small and significant. They developed their own language of touches and glances, inside jokes that made them laugh at inappropriate moments, comfortable silences that needed no words. The ranch thrived under their combined efforts. Caleb's herd grew. Charlotte's garden produced more than they could use, and she began trading excess vegetables for other goods in town. Margaret Chen suggested Charlotte might want to sell her preserves at the general store. People would buy these, Margaret said, examining a jar of strawberry jam. You've got a gift for this. Charlotte felt a spark of something she hadn't experienced in years. Ambition. Not the forced ambition her uncle had dictated, but her own vision for what she might create. Would you really sell them? She asked. Absolutely. We'll work on consignment. Whatever sells, you get 70%. I take 30% for the shelf space and handling. Charlotte did the calculations in her head. It wouldn't be a fortune, but it would be her money, earned by her own labor, belonging to no one but herself. Yes, she said, I'd like that. The first batch sold out within days. Charlotte found herself with a steady stream of income and a purpose beyond simply maintaining the household. She was contributing, building something. One afternoon in late August, Sarah Morrison arrived at the ranch in obvious distress. Her pregnancy had progressed, her belly enormous now, and she clutched it as she climbed down from her wagon. "Charlotte!" she called out. "I need your help!" Charlotte ran from the garden, alarmed by the pain in Sarah's voice. "What's wrong? Is it the baby?" "No, not yet. But Tom's gone to Denver City on sheriff business, won't be back for 3 days. My boys are with the Bridgers for the afternoon, and I just got word that Rebecca Johnson's in labor. It's her first baby, and she's all alone out on that homestead. Her husband went to town for supplies and hasn't returned." Charlotte's medical knowledge was limited, but she understood what Sarah was asking. "You want to go help her, but you can't manage the journey in your condition. Will you go, please?" "I wouldn't ask, but there's no one else, and a first birth can be dangerous without help." Charlotte thought of young Rebecca Johnson, barely 20, alone and frightened on a remote homestead. She thought of her own mother, who died when Charlotte was young, but had told her stories about the importance of women helping women. "Of course I'll go," Charlotte said. "Let me get Caleb." Caleb was in the barn, and when Charlotte explained the situation, he didn't hesitate. "I'll saddle Clover for you and ride out with you. The Johnson place is 8 miles north, rough country. I don't want you going alone." They gathered supplies quickly, clean cloth, water, whiskey for cleaning, the few medical supplies they had. Sarah gave hasty instructions on what to watch for, what to do if complications arose. "Pray it's straightforward," Sarah said, gripping Charlotte's hand. "First babies can take a long time. Just stay with her. Don't let her panic. You being there will help more than you know." The ride to the Johnson homestead took over an hour across open prairie and through creek beds. Charlotte's heart pounded with a mixture of fear and determination. She'd never attended a birth before, had no idea if she could really help. "You'll be fine," Caleb said, as if reading her thoughts. "Rebecca needs someone there who won't lose their head. You're stronger than you think." The Johnson homestead was little more than a rough cabin and a struggling vegetable patch. Rebecca's screams could be heard before they even dismounted. "You go to her," Caleb said. "I'll wait outside. Keep watch for her husband's return." Charlotte entered the dim cabin to find Rebecca writhing on a narrow bed, her face contorted with pain. "Oh, thank heavens," Rebecca gasped between contractions. "I thought I'd be alone for this." "You're not alone," Charlotte said with more confidence than she felt. She washed her hands in the basin, then examined Rebecca as best she could, remembering Sarah's hurried instructions. The labor lasted through the afternoon and into the evening. Charlotte stayed by Rebecca's side, holding her hand, wiping her brow, encouraging her when the young woman wanted to give up. "I can't do this," Rebecca sobbed during a particularly brutal contraction. "I can't, it hurts too much." "You can," Charlotte said firmly. "You're already doing it. You're so strong, Rebecca." As the sun began to set, painting the cabin in golden light, Rebecca's baby finally emerged into the world, a tiny girl with powerful lungs who announced her arrival with furious cries. Charlotte wrapped the infant in clean cloth, placed her on Rebecca's chest. Rebecca wept with relief and joy, holding her daughter with trembling hands. "You did it," Charlotte whispered, her own eyes wet. "You were so brave." Rebecca's husband arrived an hour later, his wagon having broken an axle 3 miles from town. He burst into the cabin, took in the scene, his wife and new daughter, and dropped to his knees beside the bed. "I'm sorry," he said. "I'm so sorry I wasn't here." "It's all right," Rebecca said, touching his face. "Charlotte was here. She helped me through it." On the ride home, full darkness had fallen. Caleb and Charlotte navigated by moonlight, riding close together. "You did a good thing today," Caleb said. "I was terrified the whole time." "But you did it anyway. That's what courage is." Charlotte thought about that. Courage wasn't the absence of fear. It was acting despite it. She'd learned that over these past months. Every time she'd faced something that scared her, every time she'd chosen vulnerability over safety, every time she'd trusted when every instinct told her to run. She'd been courageous without even realizing it. They arrived home exhausted, and Charlotte collapsed into bed still wearing her dress. Caleb helped her undress, his hands gentle, and pulled the covers up around her. "Sleep," he murmured. "You've earned it." Charlotte fell asleep with the memory of new life in her hands, of Rebecca's grateful tears, of the fierce tiny person who'd fought her way into the world. She woke 3 days later with a strange sensation in her stomach. At first, she thought she'd eaten something that disagreed with her, but the nausea persisted, accompanied by an overwhelming fatigue that left her dizzy. Margaret Chen took one look at Charlotte in the general store and pulled her aside. "How long since your last courses?" Margaret asked bluntly. Charlotte counted back in her mind and felt the world tilt. 2 months. Maybe longer. I thought it was just the stress with my uncle, the change in location. "Or you're pregnant," Margaret said with a knowing smile. "Have your breasts been tender? Are you tired all the time?" Charlotte nodded slowly, pieces clicking into place. "Congratulations, honey. You're going to be a mother." The words didn't feel real. Charlotte walked through the rest of her errands in a daze, riding home with her mind spinning. A baby. She was carrying Caleb's child. Terror and joy warred in her chest. She'd never planned for this, had barely adjusted to being a wife. But underneath the fear was something else, a fierce protective love for the tiny life growing inside her. She found Caleb in the barn as usual. He looked up when she entered, and whatever he saw on her face made him set down his tools immediately. "What's wrong?" "Nothing's wrong. Charlotte took a breath. "I'm pregnant." Caleb stared at her. "You're sure?" "Margaret seems to think so, and it would explain why I've been so tired, why the smell of coffee makes me ill now." "A baby." Caleb said it wonderingly, like he was testing the word. Then a huge grin split his face. "We're having a baby!" He crossed to her in 2 strides and swept her into his arms, spinning her around. Charlotte laughed despite her nervousness. "Careful, I'm delicate now, apparently." Caleb set her down gently, his hands cupping her face. "How do you feel about this?" "Really?" "Terrified," Charlotte admitted. "I don't know anything about being a mother. My own mother died when I was young, and I have no idea how to—" "You helped Rebecca Johnson through labor 3 days ago," Caleb interrupted. "You run this ranch like you were born to it. You're one of the strongest people I know. You'll be an amazing mother." Charlotte wanted to believe him. "What if I'm not? What if I make mistakes?" "Then we'll make them together. We'll figure it out as we go." Caleb's hand moved to rest gently on her still flat stomach. "This is a miracle, Charlotte. A new life we created together." That night, lying in bed with Caleb's hand on her belly, Charlotte let herself feel the joy underneath the fear. A baby. Their baby. A child who would be loved and wanted and safe. "We need to tell people," she said. "Sarah, Margaret, the neighbors. Tomorrow, Caleb agreed. Tonight, it's just ours. Charlotte fell asleep imagining the future. A child running through the garden, learning to ride, growing up surrounded by love and prairie sky and freedom. The next morning brought autumn's first frost. Charlotte woke to find the world transformed, everything covered in delicate ice crystals that sparkled in the rising sun. She was making breakfast when the nausea hit hard. Charlotte barely made it outside before being violently sick. Caleb held her hair back, his hand steady on her shoulder. "This is going to be a long 9 months," Charlotte gasped when the worst had passed. "I'll be here for all of it," Caleb promised. The weeks that followed were challenging. Charlotte's morning sickness, which wasn't limited to mornings, made the smell of most foods unbearable. She could barely keep anything down, lost weight instead of gaining it. Caleb worried constantly. Sarah Morrison, now a week past her own due date and miserable, still managed to visit with advice and remedies. "Try ginger tea," she suggested. "And don't let yourself get too hungry. Small meals throughout the day." Margaret brought crackers and candied ginger from the store. Mary Bridger shared her grandmother's recipe for a tea that was supposed to help with nausea. Charlotte was overwhelmed by the outpouring of support from women she'd known only a few months. They treated her like family, shared their knowledge and experiences, made sure she knew she wasn't alone in this. "This is what community means," Margaret said one afternoon, helping Charlotte preserve the last of the garden vegetables. "We lift each other up." By October, Charlotte's sickness began to ease. She could eat again, started to gain weight. Her belly began to swell, unmistakable evidence of the life growing inside her. Caleb was endlessly fascinated by the changes in her body. He'd rest his hand on her stomach for hours, waiting to feel movement. "Be patient," Charlotte said, laughing. "It's too early." But one November morning, as Charlotte was washing dishes, she felt it, a flutter like butterfly wings against her insides. "Caleb," she called, "come here." He came running, alarmed. "What's wrong?" "Nothing. Give me your hand." She placed his palm on her belly. "Wait. Just wait." They stood frozen for several moments. Then it came again, that gentle flutter. Caleb's eyes widened. That was our baby," Charlotte said, tears streaming down her face. "Our baby is moving." Caleb dropped to his knees, pressing his cheek against her stomach. Charlotte's hands moved to his hair, holding him there, both of them connected to the new life they'd created. Winter arrived early and harsh. By December, snow covered the prairie in deep drifts, and temperatures plummeted. Caleb worked from dawn until dark, keeping the cattle alive, breaking ice on water sources, hauling feed. Charlotte worried about him constantly. He came in each night exhausted, frost in his beard, his hands chapped and raw despite the gloves she'd made him. "You're working too hard," she said one evening, rubbing salve into his cracked hands. "Cattle won't feed themselves, and we need them healthy if we're going to support a family." Charlotte was 6 months pregnant now, her belly prominent, the baby's movement strong enough to be seen from the outside. She'd had to let out all her dresses, and Margaret was teaching her to sew baby clothes. "We'll be all right," Charlotte said. "Even if we lose some cattle, we'll manage." Caleb pulled her close, careful of her belly. "I want to give you everything, you and the baby. I want you to never worry about money or security or anything." "I don't need everything," Charlotte said softly. "I just need you." The blizzard hit 3 days before Christmas. Snow fell so thick Charlotte couldn't see the barn from the house. Wind howled like something alive, battering the walls, finding every crack and gap. Caleb went out to check the cattle and didn't return. An hour passed. Then 2. Charlotte paced the house, her panic growing with each minute. The baby kicked hard, sensing her distress. "He's fine," she told herself. "He knows these storms. He'll be fine." But when 3 hours had passed with no sign of him, Charlotte knew she had to act. She bundled herself in every warm thing she owned, tied a rope around her waist, and secured the other end to the porch post, a technique Caleb had shown her for navigating blizzards. The wind nearly knocked her down the moment she stepped outside. Snow stung her face, the cold so intense it burned. Charlotte fought her way toward the barn, using the rope as a guide. She found the barn door open, banging in the wind. Inside, the horses were restless but safe. No sign of Caleb. Caleb! Charlotte screamed, but the wind tore her voice away. She followed the fence line toward the lower pasture, the rope her only connection to safety. Her hands were numb, her face burned with cold. The baby kicked urgently, as if telling her to turn back. Then she saw it, a dark shape in the snow. Caleb collapsed against a fence post, half buried in a drift. No, no, no! Charlotte fell to her knees beside him, shaking his shoulder. Caleb, wake up! His eyes fluttered open, unfocused. Charlotte? What are you? You shouldn't be out here. Neither should you. She hooked her arms under his shoulders, tried to pull him up. He was too heavy, and she was too pregnant. Caleb, you have to help me. You have to stand. Between them, they managed to get Caleb to his feet. Charlotte guided them back along the rope, each step an agony, Caleb leaning heavily on her. She'd never been so cold in her life, never so terrified. They reached the house after an eternity. Charlotte managed to get Caleb inside and collapsed beside him, both of them gasping. You saved my life, Caleb said through chattering teeth. Don't talk. Charlotte stripped off his wet clothes with shaking hands, wrapped him in every blanket they owned, built up the fire until the room was stifling. She made hot coffee, forced him to drink it despite his protests that he was fine. His fingers and toes were white with frostbite, his lips blue. I thought I lost you, Charlotte said, tears freezing on her cheeks. I thought the baby would grow up never knowing their father. Caleb pulled her close despite his shivering. I'm here. I'm all right. But Charlotte had seen how close it had been, how easily the cold could have taken him, how fragile life was, even for someone as strong as Caleb. That night, as they lay wrapped together under every blanket they owned, Charlotte realized something with terrifying clarity. She loved this man more than she'd ever imagined possible, and losing him would destroy her in ways Victor Hale's cruelty never could. Because this time, she had something to lose. This time, she had everything. Caleb recovered slowly from his brush with death. His fingers and toes turned black before gradually returning to normal color, the frostbite thankfully not severe enough to require amputation. But the incident had shaken them both. Charlotte found herself waking multiple times each night to check that he was still breathing, her hand seeking his chest to feel its rise and fall. Caleb did the same with her, his palm resting on her swollen belly, counting the baby's kicks like prayers of gratitude. We're going to be more careful, he said one morning as they watched fresh snow fall outside. Both of us. No more risks. Agreed, Charlotte said, though they both knew ranch life didn't allow for such guarantees. January arrived with bitter cold but clear skies. Charlotte was 8 months pregnant now, moving slowly, her back constantly aching. Sarah Morrison had given birth to a healthy boy just after Christmas and visited when the weather allowed, bringing advice and hand-me-down baby clothes. The last month is the hardest, Sarah warned. You'll be uncomfortable and impatient and convinced the baby will never come. But it will, and when it does, you'll forget all the misery. Charlotte wasn't sure she believed that, but she appreciated Sarah's honesty. The women of Stone Creek had organized themselves around Charlotte's impending labor. Margaret would come stay at the ranch when the time came, bringing her experience from helping deliver half the babies in the territory. Sarah would come too, despite having a newborn of her own. Mary Bridger had promised to bring supplies and food, so Charlotte wouldn't have to worry about anything except bringing her child into the world. You're not doing this alone, Margaret said firmly during one of her visits. No woman should face childbirth alone. Charlotte thought of Rebecca Johnson, laboring in that rough cabin with only Charlotte's inexperienced hands to help. She thought of how terrified she'd been, how inadequate she'd felt. Now she was the one about to give birth, and the thought filled her with a fear that had nothing to do with Victor Hale or her past. What if something goes wrong? She asked Margaret quietly one afternoon while Caleb was out. Margaret didn't offer false reassurances. Childbirth is dangerous, I won't lie to you about that. But you're young, you're healthy, and you'll have help. Those things matter. My mother died when I was young, Charlotte said. I don't remember much about her, but I remember being told she was sick for a long time before. What if I— Don't borrow trouble, Margaret interrupted gently. Every birth is different. Your mother's experience doesn't dictate yours. But the fear lingered, growing larger as Charlotte's belly did. February came with a false thaw. 3 days of warm weather that melted the snow and turned the ranch into a sea of mud. Caleb used the break in winter to check on the cattle, repair damage from the storms, and prepare for spring. Charlotte nested. That's what Margaret called it, when Charlotte suddenly couldn't stop cleaning, organizing, rearranging everything in the house. She washed every piece of baby clothing 3 times, scrubbed floors on her hands and knees despite Caleb's protests, and reorganized the kitchen twice in 1 week. "I can't help it," she said, when Caleb found her at midnight folding and refolding tiny garments. "Everything has to be ready." "Everything is ready," Caleb said gently, taking the clothes from her hands. "Come to bed." The first pain came on a Tuesday morning. Charlotte was making breakfast when she felt it, a tightening across her belly, different from the Braxton Hicks contraction she'd been having for weeks. She gripped the counter, breathing through it. "Charlotte?" Caleb was at her side immediately. "Is it time?" "I don't know. Maybe. It might be false labor." But even as she said it, another pain came, stronger this time. Caleb didn't hesitate. "I'm writing to get Margaret and Sarah." "It might be hours yet," Charlotte protested. "Maybe days. First babies take a long time." "I don't care. I'm not leaving you alone." Caleb pulled on his coat. "I'll be back as fast as I can. Don't do anything. Just rest. Please." Charlotte wanted to argue, but another contraction stole her breath. She nodded, and Caleb was gone, riding hard toward Stone Creek. Time became strange after that. Charlotte paced the house, trying to remember everything Sarah and Margaret had told her. The contractions came irregularly at first, 20 minutes apart, then 15, then back to 20. She made tea she couldn't drink, started bread she couldn't finish. Caleb returned within 2 hours, Margaret riding behind him and Sarah following in a wagon driven by her husband. "Well, let's see what we have here," Margaret said briskly, taking charge immediately. She examined Charlotte with practiced hands. "You're progressing, but slowly. This baby's taking its time." "How long?" Charlotte asked. Margaret exchanged a look with Sarah. "Could be tonight, could be tomorrow. First babies like to keep us guessing." The afternoon stretched into evening. The contractions grew stronger, closer together. Charlotte labored in the bedroom while Margaret and Sarah took turns supporting her, offering water and encouragement. Caleb hovered in the doorway, looking helpless and terrified. "You can come in," Charlotte gasped between contractions. "I want you here." Caleb entered hesitantly, taking her hand. His presence steadied her more than she'd expected. When the next contraction came, she gripped his hand hard enough to leave marks. "I'm sorry," she panted when it passed. "Don't apologize. Break every bone in my hand if you need to." Night fell. The contractions were relentless now, each one building on the last with barely a moment to breathe between. Charlotte had never known pain like this, not from her uncle's fists, not from anything. This was pain with purpose, her body working to bring their child into the world, but it was still agony. "I can't do this," she sobbed during a particularly brutal contraction. "I can't. It's too much." "Yes, you can," Sarah said firmly. "You're already doing it. You're so strong, Charlotte." "The baby's coming," Margaret announced. "Charlotte, I need you to push with the next contraction." Charlotte pushed, screaming with the effort. Nothing happened. "Again," Margaret commanded. "Push harder." Charlotte pushed until she thought she'd split apart. Still nothing. "The baby's stuck," Margaret said quietly to Sarah. "Head's too large or Charlotte's too narrow. We need to—" "No," Charlotte gasped. She'd heard about this, about babies that couldn't be born, about women who died in childbirth because the baby wouldn't come. "Please, no." "Charlotte, look at me," Caleb said, his face close to hers. "You're not giving up. Our baby needs you to be strong. One more push. You can do this." The next contraction built like a wave. Charlotte bore down with everything she had, Caleb's hand in hers, his voice in her ear telling her she could do it. She was strong. She was brave. She was everything. And then, a release. A rush. A high, thin wail that was the most beautiful sound Charlotte had ever heard. "It's a girl," Margaret announced, holding up a tiny, furious creature covered in blood and vernix. "A perfect little girl." Charlotte collapsed back against the pillows, sobbing with relief and exhaustion and overwhelming love. Margaret cleaned the baby quickly, then placed her on Charlotte's chest. She was so small, so impossibly small and perfect. Dark hair matted against her scalp, tiny fingers curled into fists, lungs powerful enough to announce her displeasure at being born into a cold world. "Hello?" Charlotte whispered, touching her daughter's face with trembling fingers. "Hello, little one." Caleb was crying openly, his hand gentle on the baby's head. "She's perfect. Charlotte, she's perfect." "What will you name her?" Sarah asked. Charlotte looked at Caleb. They'd discussed names, but never decided definitively. Now, looking at her daughter's fierce little face, one name felt right. "Clara," she said. "Her name is Clara." "Clara Whitmore," Caleb repeated, testing it. "It's perfect." The hours after birth passed in a blur. Margaret and Sarah cleaned Charlotte, changed the bedding, showed her how to nurse. Clara latched on with the same determination she'd shown in being born, and Charlotte felt love so fierce it terrified her. "You did beautifully," Margaret said, packing up her supplies. "Rest now. Let that man of yours take care of you for once." After the women left, Caleb sat on the edge of the bed, holding Clara while Charlotte dozed. When she woke, she found him still there, staring at their daughter with wonder. "I can't believe she's real," he said. "I can't believe we made something this perfect." Charlotte reached for his hand. "We did. Together." The first weeks of Clara's life were exhausting and overwhelming and more joyful than Charlotte had imagined possible. The baby had a powerful set of lungs and used them frequently, especially at night. Charlotte was constantly tired, constantly nursing, constantly worried she was doing everything wrong. But she was also constantly amazed. Every tiny milestone, Clara focusing on her face, gripping her finger, making small cooing sounds, felt like a miracle. Caleb was a devoted father, taking over household chores so Charlotte could rest, walking Clara around the house at night when she wouldn't settle, changing diapers without complaint. Charlotte watched him with their daughter and fell in love with him all over again. "You're a natural," she said one evening, watching him rock Clara to sleep. "I'm terrified every moment that I'll drop her or do something wrong," Caleb admitted, "but I love her so much it hurts." "I know exactly what you mean." Spring came early that year, melting the last of winter's snow and painting the prairie green. Clara was 6 weeks old when the letter arrived. Caleb brought it in from town, his expression grim. Charlotte knew from the handwriting on the envelope who it was from. Her hands shook as she opened it. The letter was from a lawyer in Boston, informing her that Victor Hale had died of a stroke 3 weeks prior. As his only living relative, Charlotte was entitled to claim his estate. The lawyer requested her presence in Boston to settle the matter. Charlotte read the letter 3 times, waiting to feel something. Relief, maybe. Triumph. Even grief for the man who'd once been family. She felt nothing. "He's dead," she said aloud. Caleb took the letter, read it quickly. "I'm sorry." "Don't be." "I'm not." Charlotte looked at Clara, sleeping peacefully in her cradle. "He can't hurt us anymore, can't threaten us. Can't try to take me back." "What do you want to do about the estate?" Charlotte thought about her uncle's house in Boston, filled with furniture she'd polished and books she'd been forbidden to read. She thought about the money he'd controlled, the inheritance from her father that had funded Victor's lifestyle. "I want you to write to the lawyer," she said. "Tell him to sell everything. The house, the furniture, everything. Put the money in trust for Clara and any other children we might have. I don't want any of it touching our lives." Caleb studied her face. "Are you sure? That money could make things easier for us." "We don't need easy. We have enough." Charlotte moved to the window, looking out at the ranch they'd built together. "This is our life, this land, this house, this community. I don't want anything from Boston contaminating it." "All right," Caleb said. "I'll write to the lawyer tomorrow." That night, Charlotte stood over Clara's cradle, watching her daughter sleep. She thought about the bruises that had once circled her arms, about the fear that had governed her life for so long. She thought about stepping off that stagecoach, terrified and desperate, meeting a quiet man who'd offered her a choice. She thought about how far she'd come. The letter from Boston came 6 weeks later. The estate had been settled. After debts and fees, there was a substantial sum, enough to secure Clara's future, enough to expand the ranch if they chose, enough to make life significantly easier. Charlotte read the letter and felt nothing but distance. That money belonged to another life, another Charlotte. The woman she was now had built her wealth differently, in a garden that flourished, in preserves that sold faster than she could make them, in a marriage that had transformed from necessity to love. Summer arrived with its usual intensity. Clara grew rapidly, developing a personality that was equal parts stubborn and sweet. She had Caleb's dark hair and Charlotte's eyes, and watching her discover the world was a constant source of joy. The women of Stone Creek adopted Clara as collectively theirs. Margaret brought toys she'd saved from when her own children were small. Sarah's boys treated Clara like a beloved doll. Mary Bridger knitted enough blankets and clothes to outfit 3 babies. "It takes a village," Margaret said one afternoon, watching Clara attempt to grab at the colorful toys hanging above her. "No woman should raise a child alone." Charlotte thought about her own mother, who died too young, about growing up in Victor's house without female guidance or support, about how different her life might have been if she'd had a community like this. "I want more," she said suddenly. Margaret raised an eyebrow. "More babies? Give yourself some time, honey. You just had this one." "No, I mean, yes, eventually, but I mean more of this." Charlotte gestured around the circle of women gathered in her parlor. "I want other women to have what I have, what we have. Support, community, safety." "What are you thinking?" Charlotte hadn't fully formed the idea yet, but it crystallized as she spoke. "What if we started something? A place where women who need help could come. Women running from situations like I ran from. We could offer them work, teach them skills, help them get on their feet." Sarah leaned forward, interested. "Like a refuge?" "More than that. A pathway to independence. We teach them to ranch, to preserve food, to manage money. We help them find husbands if they want that, or help them file land claims of their own, if they don't. We give them choices." Margaret's eyes were bright. "That's ambitious. It would take resources, organization." "We have resources now," Charlotte said, thinking of the money sitting in the bank from Victor's estate. "And we have knowledge. Every woman here has skills we could teach." The idea grew over the following weeks. The women of Stone Creek embraced it enthusiastically. Tom Morrison offered legal advice on how to structure the organization. Samuel Bridger donated a parcel of land adjacent to the Whitmore Ranch where they could build housing. By autumn, they had a plan. By winter, they'd broken ground on the first building, a large house that could accommodate 6 women and their children. Caleb watched Charlotte throw herself into the project with pride and occasional concern. "You're doing too much," he said one evening, finding her poring over construction plans while nursing Clara. "The baby, the ranch, and now this. It's too much." "It's not too much. It's exactly enough." Charlotte looked up at him. "I spent years having no purpose except surviving. Now I have purpose. I have Clara. I have you. I have this ranch, and I have the ability to help women who were where I was. How could I not do this?" Caleb sat beside her, looking at the plans. "What are you going to call it?" Charlotte had been thinking about that. "Haven House, a haven for women who need one." "It's perfect," Caleb said. "Just like you." The first resident arrived in early spring, just after Clara's first birthday. Her name was Elizabeth. She was 19, and she arrived in Stone Creek with a black eye and a carpet bag just like Charlotte's had been. Charlotte met her at the stagecoach, saw her own past reflected in Elizabeth's frightened eyes. "Welcome," Charlotte said, offering her hand. "You're safe now." Elizabeth took her hand hesitantly. "How do you know?" "Because I stood where you're standing, and I found my way through. Now I'm going to help you find yours." Over the next year, more women came. Some stayed weeks, others months. They learned to garden, to preserve food, to manage money. Some married local men, good men, carefully vetted by the women of Stone Creek. Others filed land claims and built their own ranches. A few went on to other territories, armed with skills and confidence they hadn't had before. Charlotte watched each one leave, carrying their carpet bags and their hope, and felt like she was setting her younger self free over and over again. Clara grew into a bright, curious toddler who ruled the ranch with her father wrapped around her tiny finger. She learned to walk in the garden Charlotte had first tended with uncertain hands. She learned her first words from women who'd come to Haven House looking for new lives. 2 years after Clara's birth, Charlotte gave birth to a son they named Nathan. He was quieter than his sister, but just as determined. Then, 3 years later, came Rose, a surprise baby who arrived during a spring thunderstorm and seemed to bring the sunshine with her. The ranch expanded. The cattle herd grew. Charlotte's preserves were now sold in 3 towns, bringing in steady income. Haven House became a permanent fixture in Stone Creek, supported by the community and changing lives. On a summer evening when Clara was 7, Nathan was 5, and Rose was 2, Charlotte stood at the fence watching the sunset paint the sky in shades of gold and pink. Caleb came up behind her, wrapping his arms around her waist. "What are you thinking about?" he asked. Charlotte leaned back against him, watching their children play in the yard. Clara was teaching Nathan how to braid prairie grass while Rose toddled between them, chattering nonsensically. "I'm thinking about the day I stepped off that stagecoach," Charlotte said. "How terrified I was. How I thought I was just running away from something terrible. And I didn't realize I was running toward something better." She turned in his arms to face him. "Toward you, toward this, toward a life I never imagined I could have." Caleb's hand came up to cup her face, his thumb brushing her cheekbone. "Do you ever regret it? Answering that advertisement?" Charlotte thought about everything that had brought her to this moment. The fear, the courage, the slow building of trust. The first time Caleb had asked if she was there by choice. The night she'd told him she loved him. The terror and triumph of bringing Clara into the world. The years of work and love and building something real. "Not for a single day," she said. Clara's voice called out from the yard. "Mama! Papa! Come see what we made." They walked hand in hand to where their children waited, the last light of day warming their faces. Charlotte looked at her family, this life she'd chosen, this love she'd built, and felt a peace that had once seemed impossible. The bruises had faded years ago. The fear had loosened its grip. The woman who'd stepped off that stagecoach, desperate and alone, seemed like someone from another lifetime. But the core of her remained, the strength that had carried her through, the hope that refused to die, the belief that she deserved better than what Victor Hale had offered. She'd been right to hope, right to run, right to answer an advertisement that promised nothing except honesty and a chance. That evening, after the children were in bed, Charlotte and Caleb sat on the porch watching stars emerge in the darkening sky. The prairie stretched endlessly around them, the same land where Charlotte had first learned to ride, first felt safe, first began to believe in possibility. "Tell me something," Caleb said, breaking the comfortable silence. "If you could go back and tell that woman on the stagecoach something, what would it be?" Charlotte considered the question. She thought about herself at 21, bruised and terrified, clutching a carpet bag and hoping she'd made the right choice. "I'd tell her that it gets better," Charlotte said finally, "that the man waiting for her will ask her what she wants and then actually listen to the answer. I'd tell her that she'll find a community that will hold her up when she's weak and celebrate with her when she's strong. I'd tell her that one day she'll have children who will never know the fear she knew, who will grow up believing they deserve kindness because that's all they've ever been shown." "What else?" Caleb asked softly. Charlotte leaned her head on his shoulder. "I'd tell her that love doesn't have to hurt, that partnership is possible, that choosing herself isn't selfish, it's survival. And I'd tell her to be brave because everything she's running toward is worth the risk of hope." They sat in silence for a while, watching the stars multiply overhead. Inside the house, their children slept safely. Beyond the fence, the cattle grazed peacefully. In town, Haven House sheltered women who were just beginning their own journeys toward freedom. "You know what the best part is?" Charlotte said. "What's that?" "I don't have to tell her any of that. She already knows. She knew it the moment she chose to step off that stagecoach instead of climbing back on. She knew it when she said yes to your proposal. She knew it every time she chose hope over fear." Caleb kissed the top of her head. She was always brave. She just didn't know it yet. Charlotte thought about bravery, real bravery, not the absence of fear, but the decision to act despite it. She thought about all the small moments of courage that had led her here, answering an advertisement, accepting 3 days to decide, learning to ride, standing up to Victor, bringing children into the world, building Haven House, loving without reservation. Each choice had been a small act of rebellion against the life Victor had planned for her. Each choice had been a vote of confidence in herself. "What are you grateful for?" Caleb asked. It was a question they'd started asking each other years ago, a way of remembering their blessings. "Everything," Charlotte said simply. "The hard parts and the easy parts. The fear that taught me strength, the loneliness that taught me to value connection, even the pain because it led me here." "I'm grateful you answered my advertisement," Caleb said. "I'm grateful you chose to stay. I'm grateful for every day I get to spend with you." Charlotte turned to kiss him, soft and sweet. After all these years, his kisses still made her heart race. After all these years, his presence still made her feel safe. They went inside together as the night deepened around them. Charlotte checked on the children one last time. Clara sprawled across her bed, Nathan curled up with his favorite wooden horse, Rose sleeping with her thumb in her mouth. Each one precious, each one proof that she'd broken the cycle of fear and control that Victor had tried to perpetuate. Her children would grow up knowing they had choices, knowing they were valued for who they were, not what they could provide, knowing that love was patient and kind, not controlling and cruel. That was Charlotte's greatest victory. Not the ranch, not Haven House, not the money in the bank. Her greatest victory was raising children who would never understand what it meant to be afraid in their own home. Charlotte slipped into bed beside Caleb, his arm automatically reaching for her in the dark. This simple gesture, the unconscious reaching for each other, summed up their marriage better than any vows could. They were partners, choosing each other day after day, year after year. "I love you," Charlotte whispered into the darkness. "I love you too," Caleb replied, his voice already drowsy. "Always." Charlotte closed her eyes, feeling the warmth of her husband beside her, hearing the quiet breathing of her children down the hall, knowing that tomorrow would bring its own challenges and joys. She thought one last time about the woman she'd been, the frightened girl with bruises on her arms and terror in her heart. That woman had made a desperate choice, answering an advertisement from a stranger because she had nowhere else to turn. She'd thought she was choosing survival. She hadn't realized she was choosing life. Not just existence, not just safety, but full, abundant, messy, joyful life. A life built on trust and respect and love freely given. A life where her voice mattered, where her choices were honored, where her strength was celebrated instead of crushed. The stagecoach ride to Stone Creek had been the longest 3 weeks of her life, but it had been worth every dusty mile, every uncomfortable night, every moment of uncertainty, because it had brought her home. Not to a place exactly, but to herself, to the woman she was always meant to be, to a life where she could stand tall, speak freely, love without fear. Charlotte drifted toward sleep with a smile on her face, secure in the knowledge that she was exactly where she belonged. Tomorrow she would wake early and tend her garden. She would prepare breakfast for her family, kiss her children, work alongside her husband. She would visit Haven House and meet with women who reminded her of her younger self. She would laugh with Margaret, share news with Sarah, accept Mary Bridger's latest gift of knitwear for the children. She would live the life she'd chosen, the life she'd fought for, the life she deserved, and it would be beautiful. Not because it was perfect, it wasn't. There would be hard days ahead, challenges to face, losses to mourn, but through it all she would have what Victor Hale had tried to deny her: choice, respect, love, freedom. These were the pillars upon which she'd built her new life. These were the gifts Caleb had offered her from the very beginning. These were the things she would fight to give every woman who came to Haven House, because everyone deserved what Charlotte had found. Everyone deserved a chance to choose their own path. Everyone deserved to be loved for who they were, not controlled for what they could provide. Charlotte's last conscious thought before sleep claimed her was simple but profound. She had survived, she had healed, she had thrived, and in doing so she had transformed from a woman running from her past into a woman running toward her future. The journey had started with 3 quiet words from a stranger who would become her husband, her partner, her home. "Who hurt you?" Caleb hadn't demanded, he hadn't claimed, he had asked, and in that question he had given her everything. The bruises had faded, the fear had loosened, but the love they built, steady, equal, freely given, that remained. And it would remain for the rest of their days, a testament to the transformative power of choosing hope over fear, love over control, freedom over captivity. Charlotte Whitmore fell asleep in the arms of the man who had saved her not by rescuing her, but by giving her the tools to save herself. And that made all the difference.